Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on our Friday afternoon club free webinar series. This Friday, it is your message clear? Managing the invisible classroom dynamic. My name is Lisa Rue. I am the Senior Program Manager and Trainer for Healthy Futures New Culture. And joining me today is Keith Hill, the project coordinator for Spartanburg Regional Foundation. Keith, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yep. I'm Keith Hill. We are housed in the Spartanburg Regional Foundation. I work for an OPA initiative, grant-funded initiative called Connect Spartanburg. And we train and do capacity building in various evidence-based interventions, Healthy Futures, New Culture included. And I'm in a unique situation because for 10 years, I was an educator prior to my position at Connect Spartanburg. And for 7 of those years, I directly taught Healthy Futures to middle schoolers. And I believe in the program. And so now being on the capacity building side of it is pretty interesting. So anytime I'm able to talk about Healthy Futures or just facilitation in general, I'd like to do that. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Keith. And Ria Gordon is going to be monitoring the chat. Ria is the CEO of Healthy Futures New Culture and of Elevate New England. And so she's going to be helping me to try to monitor the chat for other folks who might be trying to sign in late for the webinar. So hopefully we can catch those folks as they sign in. So from the registration, I can see we have people from community-based programs, technical and support and training agencies, school districts and city governments, as well as professors of health communication. Ren, can you do a quick introduction? We met at the Connect conference, and I just would like everyone to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, my name is Ren Baris, and I am right down the road from where Keith is. When he was describing the weather, I was thinking, gosh, sounds just like where I am. And he's 3 miles away. So I teach health communication, among other types of communication courses at a university that has about 6,000 students in it. And I was at that conference because I was presenting some of my research that I've done over the past few years on communication and non-suicidal self-injury. It's good to be here. Good to meet you all.
Great. Thanks so much, Ren. Appreciate it. So before I worked for Healthy Futures, I worked as a program evaluator and researcher from about 2005 to 2015. And I became Senior Program Manager and Trainer for Healthy Futures just this last year in 2022. And now that I work for Healthy Futures, we are in the process of trying to gather replication data. And what I learned with the study that we're going to talk about at the beginning of this presentation is critical to helping Healthy Futures learn how to replicate data. So I just want to see if anybody else is signing in. Nope, I don't think so. So this ability to replicate data has been problematic for lots of evidence-based programs. Healthy Futures is an evidence-based program, and we are working on, how do we actually replicate the initial findings that were published in the American Journal of Public Health about our program. And so what I'm sharing with you today applies to your prevention program if you're delivering it in a group-based setting. It does not necessarily reflect the policies of HHS, nor does it imply endorsement. So our guiding research question for the messaging study that I worked on was, are there differences among the effectiveness of these interventions based on whether a particular intervention is designed and implemented as a single message program, which is an abstinence only or condoms only type of program, versus a multi-message program that includes both abstinence and contraceptive messages. We were also looking at sub-questions around whether or not there were differences according to developmental stages, and whether or not there were different outcomes that were affected by either the single or the multi-message program. We had a distinguished panel of methods experts, including Richard Blissett from Seton University, Brian Gosling from Mathematica Research, Meredith Kelsey from Apt Associates, and William Janes from the University of California, Long Beach. And the curriculum review panel included Angela Turner, Dr. Chen from the New York College of Medicine, and Kay Reed from Dibble Institute. So the design we used was a descriptive approach with publicly available data from September 2019 to 2020, 15 HHS-funded evaluations of teen pregnancy prevention and sexuality education programs were included in the analysis, and our criteria required strong implementation and fidelity of group-based settings, inclusive of participants ages 12 to 18. So our results and recommendations. Our data did not provide evidence of effectiveness for either single or multi-message programs. Historically, program messaging has been described as abstinence only, comprehensive sexuality education, and/or abstinence plus. These descriptions, however, lack precision, making it difficult to isolate the primary messages to determine the effectiveness of the program. The process of research that we went through developed and validated rubrics to improve the evaluation of primary messaging. And one of the barriers we ran into is that we need, and recommendations we made to the government, is that we need consistent outcome measures across the programs. In other words, for example, number of multiple partners. This is a recent headline from Colorado. STI rates are raising in Colorado, with Clear Creek County being no exception. And so, of course, the state is trying to bring the numbers down through testing and outreach. And my question is, we need to also bring the numbers down through prevention of STIs, especially with these health promotion types of programs. So the conclusions of our study, based on our findings, it appears that single and multi-messages, single versus multi-messages, excuse me, are not a key factor in changing adolescent sexual behaviors. However, the setting for these programs matters. Classroom, culture, and climate and school environments, as well as peer influences, may be important to consider, especially as it relates to the ability to replicate evidence-based programs. So these results must be viewed within the limitations of the study. This does not mean that these programs don't work. We just didn't find the differences in outcomes by type of messaging used in the program. A significant limitation included our inability to access the original data sets from national evaluations because there were no data sharing agreements in place and there were IRB limitations. We could not get original data sets to do secondary analysis, and that significantly reduced the power of our study and our ability to see a difference if there was indeed a difference between types of messages on program outcomes. But even though we did not find differences in program outcomes based on whether it was a single message program or a multi-message program, we did learn a lot that we can use, and the role of classroom climate emerged as an important variable that has been understudied in the field with these types of programs. So health promotion messages are filtered through factors that exist in the culture of the school and the classroom. And this includes the level of sexualization, the behavior of high status peers, and the perceived safety of sexual activity. For example, peers with high status who also perceive a subjective level of acceptable risk due to their crowd affiliation may assume sex is safe as long as they use a condom, when in reality, risk could be increased if their number of partners increases, or if they use a condom but are potentially exposed to STIs, sexually transmitted infections, that condoms are not as effective against, resulting in increased exposure to sexually transmitted infections. For example, consistent and correct use of condoms reduces the risk of genital herpes only by 30%. Chlamydia or gonorrhea risk is reduced by 60%, so it's a little bit better with those STIs, and condoms do not reduce the risk of transmission for HPV, which is epidemic in our adolescent population. So this is why, I wonder why we haven't been measuring outcomes related to multiple partners with these programs. So Keith, can you share with us a little bit about why self-efficacy is an important outcome for your school district served by Connect and your CQI process?
Sure.
And a little bit about refusal skills and how that can be difficult for teachers.
Yeah, so I'll lay out, just kind of lay out how it's set up with Connect in general. Again, been with Connect for about a year now, a little over a year. When these school districts use the evidence-based interventions, we go in, obviously I talked about capacity building and training. We're all trained. Somebody on our team is trained in each of the evidence-based interventions that we put out to the school districts. And then we also do CQI. We do fidelity monitoring for each of the evidence-based interventions. And then we try to use that CQI to make sure that feedback is given to improve the outcomes. So the slide that Lisa had up showed a statistic. If you want to bring that back up, Lisa, I'll be able to talk about this. This is actually a statistic that is from a SurveyMonkey. So all of the different facilitators, and you're looking at just for Healthy Futures in general, 80 to 90 facilitators within the school districts that we serve. We serve over 7,000 youth in Spartanburg County, which is a very high number, and we're very proud of that, but we could not do it without facilitators. So that should tell you why this topic in general is very important to me in the role that I play with Connect. But at the end of their facilitation of Healthy Futures, Love Notes, whatever curriculum it is that they're rolling out to their youth, there's a survey. And what we want to know from youth is there's a few questions. I think it's about an 18 to 20 question survey, but we want to know what their experience was like, what their takeaways were, and we want them to give us feedback on their facilitator. And if we left it at that, it would be one thing, but what we do is develop a CQI report, and then we go into the school district and print out that CQI report. And an example of what that might look like would be attendance, which after each session that a teacher or facilitator teaches, they take roll and they answer a few questions such as how involved were the students in the class that you taught, and who all was there, obviously, about attendance, and then how much you think that the students understood from the material that you taught. So that's on the teacher's end. On the student end, at the very end of the lessons, we ask them the other question. So the question that you just saw, how confident are you saying no? That's self-efficacy, the ability or the confidence that you have in your ability to say no when some of these real world problems or risky behaviors come into your realm. And 77% looks high, right? That's pretty good. But from our end, we look at it as in what's happening with the other percentage that are not confident saying no, what could be done on the facilitator's end to help that. And in Healthy Futures specifically, role playing is one of the ways in which self-efficacy is conveyed to students. They have to practice it. And what we found is that this is, and I know from personal experience, that's the easiest part of these lessons to not get kids involved in if you didn't want to as a facilitator. But we found it to be extremely valuable for students to practice within the curriculum. That's one of the parts of the curriculum that we really enjoy. But it is one of the parts. This statistic to me is one of the most important statistics, because if a student has no self-efficacy, when these real world problems hit them and they don't have that confidence to say no, you can fill in the blank on what may happen. So that's a little bit about self-efficacy in general. One of the things, and at least I think we'll talk about it in a little bit, as far as the role plays, I think we'll get into one of the tactics that we've used. But other than the self-efficacy skills, we found that this percentage of students is either a high status peer, and Lisa worked with me at our Adolescent Health Conference to kind of talk about these things to facilitators that were attending the Adolescent Health Conference. But out of that percentage that are not confident saying no, being able to approach a high status peer and figure out a way as a facilitator to use them to reach those youth that are vulnerable. This 23% that you see are not confident saying no, it ultimately are vulnerable. So what can a facilitator do? How can they use their high status peers to increase this number? And we rely heavily on, I don't know if you're familiar with youth risk behavior survey data, as well as CQI from these evidence-based interventions to move the needle, or the percentages of teen pregnancy and other risky behaviors within Spartanburg County.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about self-efficacy and why it's important. And please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. We'll do a question and answer period. So why is self-efficacy important? Well, we know developmentally that kids are listening more to their peers and the messages from their peers at this age than they ever have before. It kind of shifts from listening mostly to parental messages, and then the peer messages during middle school and high school start increasing. It doesn't mean that messages from parents decrease or become less valuable. It just means that the messages they're hearing from peers matters. And so these high status peers are an area that has been really understudied in terms of the role and their role in setting the classroom climate. And so why is that important? Well, self-efficacy is a great construct to measure. I like using this in evaluation research because it's a good intermediate variable, especially for like a CQI process, which is continual quality improvement process, like what Spartanburg schools are doing. It's nice because school districts often do not like to measure sexual behaviors. Nobody likes asking kids, well, how many times have you had sex this year? And how many partners have you had? And all of these. So a lot of times school districts don't like to measure that. And instead you can measure self-efficacy, and then you can link back to Bandura's research. And when you increase self-efficacy, it's likely that you're also increasing behaviors the positive way that you intend. So Albert Bandura says that self-efficacy is a prerequisite to positive behavior decisions and actions, provides a foundation on which social cognitive theory is built. And in order for behavior change or acceptance to occur, youth must believe that delaying sex is possible for them. And it is the foundation for social cognitive theory, which affects decision-making. And decision-making depends on information, perceived risks, and vulnerability. So there's that word perceived risks again. And self-efficacy to practice abstinence or to utilize effective contraceptive and STI risk reduction strategies. So the youth must learn to develop these relationship skills with confidence in their capabilities to effectively weigh the potential benefits and consequences of their choices. So we're really talking about how we can leverage this classroom dynamic and self-efficacy using Brown's model of peer influence, which I have in the citations for this presentation. I will send you a PDF with that citation. And like what Keith said is, leveraging these high status peers to help support the messages, the health promotion messages in your classroom where you're delivering these programs. And I believe that this classroom dynamic is likely the reason why it is so hard to replicate evidence-based programs. So what we're doing at Healthy Futures is really gearing up to do a replication study. And so we're really coming to the place where we want to be able to quantify in some scale this classroom climate factor and maybe use it as a covariate in our replication study. Okay, so what makes a student a classroom influencer, either a positive or negative way? We know that kids, we have Facebook influencers, we have TikTok influencers, we have Instagram influencers, and there's a lot of people making a lot of money when they're an influencer. And I still can't really figure out what makes an influencer, especially on TikTok or Instagram. But we know that, in a classroom dynamic, there are some kids who are influencers. And the high status peer is really defined by the peer group itself. It might not be what we think as a high status peer would be. I did a focus group with some classroom instructors and found that I asked them this question: what makes a student an influencer, either a positive or a negative influencer? And they said, well, it's someone who can get others riled up, or it's someone who's likable and confident. There's someone who smokes a lot. Was one of the some of the feedback that we got from our focus group. So what do you think? What makes someone a high status peer influencer in a classroom? And we have several people who have done this kind of work a lot. And so I just want to open it up to the group. What makes someone an influencer in class? You can just go ahead and jump in. You might want to unmute yourself.
I would have to say that, and this certainly isn't based on evaluation or study or anything, but it's having raised one of those influencers. I have a son who just became like an immediate Pied Piper. Our house was always filled, and my own instinct was that it was just based on the force of this very kind of vivacious personality that just drew people. And it drew, what was interesting to me was it would draw people who typically weren't affirmed, like he would, you could be the cutest little cheerleader, but you could also be the math nerd, and they were his friends. And that always intrigued me. And it's still true to this day, actually.
Yeah, cool.
So I don't have any kind of study for that, though. It's just my mother gut. Let's put it that way.
Mother guts are important. Yeah. What else? What else have you seen make someone an influencer?
I'll just jump in. I don't think there's any one thing. Of course, it's a combination of things, but they tend to be persuasive and eloquent, and sometimes they're just really good fashion trendy type folks who have a good fashion sense, and they're on top of things in that way. So those are some things that I've noticed by what do we call them in communication? We call them opinion leaders.
Okay, opinion leaders, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some kind of leader, right? I mean, it could be a leader in a positive sense, or it could be a leader in the negative sense, right? Some of our toughest kids, I was a special ed teacher and worked with kids with severe emotional behavioral disorders. And many of those kids were incredible leaders, right? And they just kind of were leading in the wrong direction. So a lot of my job was to try to refocus those leadership skills into a positive direction. So the question is, and this is where, it becomes so difficult to replicate these evidence-based programs. And I think it's because we haven't really learned how to measure or account for leveraging this invisible classroom dynamic. How do we leverage this invisible dynamic that influences our health promotion messages? And so Keith, can you talk a little bit about your expectations for teachers and how you encourage them to add value to the evidence-based program that they're delivering? What are the strategies that you use?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do in training is make it known to facilitators that one of the things that the Comprehensive Health Education Act, you have to have a board, and that board has to review curriculums clearly before anything gets put out into a school. And I tell them that, you're very lucky that you're not having to go through curriculums and find one that works, because it's hard to agree on what goes out. So the positive that I tell our facilitators is that you're not having to be on the hook for what curriculum gets taught. The other thing is you're not having to really develop any lesson plan or anything of that nature. So one of the expectations for me is preparation. And part of that preparation before, you and I ever spoke was, Lisa, was making sure that you had everything printed out, making sure that you had your technology in order. If you're teaching on a computer, making sure that whatever tabs you're using are already up. 10 seconds doesn't seem like a lot, but when you get a room full of 7th graders, 10 seconds can be a lifetime if it's you trying to pull something up that is necessary to continue class. You can lose a class in 10 to 20 seconds, at least their attention span. So one of the expectations is to be prepared in general prior to classes coming in. But as we've been speaking and in my training recently, one of the expectations that we've talked about is, have you mentally put yourself in a position to think about your classroom dynamic? Each one of them. Are you teaching 6 classes? Who's in this class, this first class, that you might not be making good contact with? Who is in this class that when this material, we're using Healthy Futures at this moment as an example, but in that material, who do you feel is going to have a bit of a disconnect? And what is it as a facilitator are you doing to add value to your facilitation in general? I think teachers think about it all the time in their regular classroom. I would hope they do. That's part of what professional development's about. What can you learn to figure out and add value to what you're already doing to spice things up a bit? But that's one of the expectations is what can you do with your classroom dynamic to figure out how to increase the value for each and every student in there. And the answer is sort of thinking about the relationships that exist, maybe the relationships that don't exist, and having a plan for your classroom dynamic prior to them walking in the room.
Yeah, so we talked about, if you're a teacher in a school district, you can work with your other team to determine, who are the tier 1 influencers, who are the tier 2 that could go either way in the class, and who are those tier 3 vulnerable youth that you really need to be paying attention of and reaching out to encourage and bolster them, maybe co-regulate some of these activities with them. So teachers can reach out to those students who may be more vulnerable to help build up their status in a way that's healthy rather than building, kids want to increase their status, but sometimes they try to increase their status with risky behaviors. For those folks who are professional facilitators where you don't have the luxury of a day-to-day school relationship, those folks can work with host teachers to follow these same strategies. You can go in and observe classrooms for 1 to 2 to 3 days, and you can kind of identify who those high status peers are. You can work with your host teacher to say, hey, what can you do to back me up with this? And you can also look at some of the data that's existing. For example, nurse data from the school nurse, that's going to be helpful information. School counselor data, you want to look at, what is the level of sexualization that this particular school or class is dealing with? Is there a lot of sexting going on? And all of that information would be with the dean of students or with the school nurse, school counselors. Does this particular community have some issues around sex trafficking or gang-related, activities? Those kinds of things can really help you do some pre-planning to gauge this level of classroom dynamic before you ever get there. Some of our focus group responses included making deals together and compromising. So you can meet with these high status peers and encourage a positive dynamic by meeting and taking them aside before or after class, having coffee with them, building a relationship of trust with that student, maybe showing up at their ball game or special event and letting them know that you were there. And once you have a relationship with them, you can ask them, hey, can you tone it down in class if they're getting a little too rambunctious, or let's change roles today and you be the teacher for this lesson. Hey, how about you helping me out today? If you help me out today with this lesson, I have a new sweatshirt, water bottle, highlighter, or some other kind of swag item that might be encouraging to them. Varying questioning techniques to give others a chance to participate. Moving toward that student, having a physical presence to that student, maybe a non-verbal gesture. Swag bags, and Keith has an ambassadors program. Keith, can you talk a little bit about your ambassadors program?
Yeah, so we have youth ambassadors that are throughout Spartanburg County. We've done an internship as well at different high schools around the area, but Connect we like to say that we're youth owned and operated, and our ambassadors help to not only increase our communications and marketing through their social channels. We don't, 0 adults are on our social media. It's all youth, and anything that we post it goes through the ambassadors first. We put them through a pretty extensive orientation prior to them becoming Connect ambassadors. They're the face of Connect, and their job is to make sure that more youth understand what Connect does, and that's connect teens to the services and supports that exist in Spartanburg County. Everybody from 13 to 19, they need to know about that. So I would say for the most part, they take it as a job. We kind of have youth that are on sports teams and youth that are working and things like that. So we have a large group that, sort of, sometimes we have a smaller group that is existing to get things done, but they use youth risk behavior survey data to create projects within Spartanburg County. The most recent project was at the Chapman Cultural Center. They used the youth risk behavior survey data to do a photo voice project where they took photos related to a certain aspect, such as substance abuse or mental health, and they created a website. And so we've adapted a curriculum to use with our ambassador group, but we have found that their input is so vital to being able to get the message out to youth. I think a lot of corporations, businesses, they want to connect or communicate with youth, but they don't utilize youth voice in order to do that. So we certainly try our best to do that. But that's what our ambassador group does in a nutshell. And at the Adolescent Health Conference, we revealed another project that we had been working on related to Healthy Futures. We asked a group of ambassadors, what is it? Just throw some ideas out, and we'll rank the one that is number one to you. And so one of the ideas that they all got on board with, they wanted to improve the middle school experience from what they experienced. And we asked them how they wanted to do that. And they said, well, through peer communications or peer education. And so we went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out a way for them to do that. And we did find that Healthy Futures is a communication platform to where a lot of middle schoolers are seeing the same material. And so they made a video, a music video that they kind of produced themselves. And we're going to roll that out to, it's finally finalized, and it'll roll out to all the facilitators that are teaching Healthy Futures over the next year, and they can play it prior to lessons, and they can play the audio, you know, over the intercom when they're or when they're playing music in the gym or wherever it may be. But that was one of their projects. So yeah, that's and we have a new crop of ambassadors this year, and we'll see what their projects look like in the months to come. But it certainly is it's a way for an old coach, somebody that used to coach youth, to be able to still be involved with youth in a competitive manner, because they're competing in a way that is all important in changing their community for the better. So that's how they're competing as a team, and that's the way I display the information to them. But their orientation is in October 22nd for this year.
Yeah, that is such a great video too. We're gonna put that on our website now that it's finalized, and the kids did a great job with that. The other suggestions that our focus group participants said that they use is to find out what the need is and provide for that need. For example, you know, maybe one of these influencers you know, need some food, a job reference, a gym bag, haircuts, you know, basic things that might really go a long way to building a relationship with that influencer and helping them lead that dynamic in your classroom in a positive way. Faculty meetings, you can share concerns and issues with faculty about influencers. Build a relationship with, you know, what are your goals for this year, this semester? How can I help you stay on track? We can do home visits, phone calls, and that kind of thing. And that's primarily for, you know, a school-based program like yours.
And I'll say one more thing too, sure, before we move on from those influencers. One of the common themes anytime you ask about influencers in general, or students that are of high status around their peers, it is leadership skills. I mean, I think everybody that mentioned or said something a moment ago, they mentioned either directly or indirectly leadership skills. And so as a facilitator or a teacher in general, professor, if we can, as the people serving those youth, if we can recognize the leadership abilities that students have, which there's a ton of them. Some lead through their creativity, some lead through their good looks, some lead through examples, hard work. There's all kinds of ways that these leaders can lead others. But as adults, if we can use our brain power to figure out what those leadership abilities are in our students, then we can, I'm going to say exploit those, but we can use them to better the group environment as a whole. And I think that's, in a nutshell, that's what these peer influencers are trying to do. We're trying to figure out how they lead. We notice that they're leading. It's very obvious, but we need to find out the method in which they're using and use that to cater to their leadership skills, or advance what leadership skills they lack and make them a better or more well-rounded leader in general. I think that's two things that we can do as facilitators or adults, to use these great leadership abilities that they inadvertently have or they've developed over time.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So I was working on a research project at my former university. We were working with a pediatric clinic to identify high-risk kids and really looking at this role-playing and refusal skill component that is so critical for self-efficacy. And this young lady was about 16. She was identified by her pediatrician as being very high risk. She happened to be an adolescent who was sexually active. She had some experiences in the past that really were disconcerting to her, and she had a desire to reestablish new sexual boundaries. So I was working with her once a week, every Monday after her weekend experiences. And I would ask her, so what'd you do this weekend? And how, you know, tell me how it's going. We would be practicing these refusal skills. And she told me, she said, well, you know, we went to a frat party and this gal's 16, right? And this happens a lot where, especially in university towns, these young high school girls are going to frat parties on the weekend. And she said, well, I went to this frat party and I met this really cute guy and I really liked him. And of course, you know, he asked me to come upstairs. So I went upstairs with him and then I sat on his bed. And when I looked at him, I saw your face. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't leave my friend alone downstairs. I have to go downstairs. I can't stay here. And she left. And it's such a funny story because it's such a great way, an example of how the adolescent brain works. In that, you know, she couldn't think through the fact that maybe going to a frat party is not a great place to go if you're trying to reestablish some new sexual boundaries. She didn't really think through that it wasn't a good idea to go upstairs with this guy. It wasn't really a good idea to sit on his bed. But finally, her prefrontal cortex kicked in and she said, and then I saw your face. And then she remembered the refusal skill we were working on, which is, hey, I can't leave my friend alone. I've got to go. And so it's just a great example of how these adolescent brains work with refusal skills. Keith, can you just tell us a little bit about what we're trying this year with your school districts with these 3D posters for the refusal skill unit?
Yeah, because, you know, that we showed the self-efficacy data, and that is one section that or one area we're focusing on trying to improve. We have a few single gender classrooms. In fact, I would say the percentage of classes or school districts in general when it comes to comprehensive health that use single gender classrooms is high. They're not necessarily required to unless they're, you know, going over human anatomy, STIs, things of that nature, but they just split up and they have or female and male classrooms. So within the curriculum, sometimes it makes it tough to do the role plays because if the curriculum developer is expecting there to be males and females within the setting, the room where you're teaching, the role plays might be set up male and female. And that's what we saw within the curriculum in various different spots. And so what we used to have to do is figure out a way to make it not as awkward for students. One of the things that I would do is I'd put a broom inside of a cone. I was a PE teacher teaching comprehensive health, and I put a broom inside of a cone and make that the female. And then one of our males would come down and we would conduct this role play and try to figure out, you know, how to just decrease the awkwardness of role playing regarding sexual activity. So one of the strategies that I kind of approached Lisa with when we started was, how can we make this a little bit less awkward for students? And so we came up with these 3D cutouts, a male and a female cutout, different genders, different ethnicities that can stand up within the room setting. And teachers can use those for students to develop lines of a dialogue for the two people that are up, the 3D cutouts. So they're not directly being themselves. You know, one of the other things is we don't necessarily want one of the youth to be a perpetrator within a role play. So it's easy to say, we need to increase self-efficacy, and role plays is one of the best ways to do that. Okay, well, if you don't have effective role plays because students don't feel comfortable doing them, then it's a double-edged sword, or it's something that might not be as effective, right? So this is just a way to kind of decrease the awkwardness and increase the participation rate. I mean, we had some teachers at the health conference that were, you know, they knew right offhand when they saw these things, they're like, yeah, our kids will think those are really fun. And that was kind of the point, is to make sure that students have a reason to want to get involved, and therefore they're participating. And then in turn, the percentage of those that feel that self-efficacy increase. So that's kind of the plan with those. And I think Healthy Futures has done a great job of developing the cutouts, and see how it goes with the other districts and with our districts.
Yeah, thanks. Mm-hmm. So it's important with these role-playing activities, you want to emphasize also the nonverbal language. So you can have, you know, a 3D cutout or poster in the front of the room, and you can have kids walk up to that poster. And as they're walking up, you can give them some tips around how are you presenting yourself? You know, we all know those real vulnerable kids oftentimes have very, you know, clear nonverbal language that kind of sets them up as a target within their peer group. Maybe their shoulders are rounded, they look down a lot, they don't do a lot of eye contact. And so when you're working with these kids and trying to build their self-efficacy for refusal skills, pay attention to that nonverbal language as they're walking up, you know, to do the role plays with these 3D models. You want them to, you know, put their shoulders back, stand up straight and tall, you know, have eye contact, show them how to increase their confidence non-verbally, because that helps them increase their status in their peer group. And it also helps them increase their self-efficacy within the group. And so we also need to teach sometimes that students have to value themselves more than the relationships they might be in and be willing to walk away. Sometimes these more vulnerable kids really don't have a lot of self-worth or self-value. And so it's up to the facilitator and the teacher to kind of co-regulate that value. And you say, you know what, you guys are worth waiting for. You are valuable. Your future is valuable. I believe in you. And you might not believe in yourself right now, but let's just keep talking and let's keep practicing these skills so that you can navigate these intimate relationships in these risky situations and have more agency and confidence to be able to be successful within your peer group and practice these refusal skills and increase your confidence. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to honor your time. Do we have any questions that have popped up?
Yes, Lisa, if you want your other staff members to see this, will this be recorded somewhere and posted that I could share with them?
Absolutely. We are recording it and we will post it on the Healthy Futures website under resources. So you're welcome to go back and play it with your staff and review it with your key stakeholders and gatekeepers.
Okay, thank you so very much. This has been very interesting, and thank you for the topic, even on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, not to rush or anything, but I sure could use that that anecdote that you told about the frat party on Monday morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so if you're not doing anything between now and then and you want to post that, that'd be appreciative. Wednesday would be fine though too.
Sure.
We're doing a lesson. We're writing something called inoculation. Do you talk about inoculation as a?
Yeah, can you just share a little bit about inoculation? Go ahead, Ren.
Well, inoculation is you practice in a setting exactly what you were talking about. You practice this threat that they might encounter, so that when they do encounter the reality, which is a big threat, they're ready for that and they have that practice. It's the model is, of course, like an inoculation. You give them a little shot of the virus or flu or whatever, and then their body is prepared for the reality when the big virus comes and attacks their body.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I'm happy to share that. I don't know if I can do it Monday, but I for sure will do it on Wednesday. I just think it's a great example of how we can work with these teens to meet them where they are developmentally and give them some of these important skills. So I will send everybody a copy of this PDF of this PowerPoint. If you have further questions, you can reach me or Keith, and we'd be happy to answer those questions. Thank you for joining me and our team for Friday Afternoon Club, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Keith.
Yep. Lisa, do you want to stay on a moment?
Yeah, send me a copy of that file so we can put that on our Facebook page. I'm going to go
the video.
or not, yeah, or not the, well, actually we could do it on our Facebook page. I'm going to stop recording.